Hi, and welcome to the Leader's Edge, our weekly live interview show where Georgia Donaldson and I, Emily Chiwa, feature successful CEOs and professionals who are so kind to share their stories with us. We want to bring awareness, inspiration, and leadership tips for you to action to help you sharpen your competitive advantage and make a positive impact in your organization and community. Remember, if you are watching us live, you can comment on LinkedIn if you want to ask a question. So, the topic this week is leadership equals accountability. Do you agree that for some reason it seems like accountability is a bad word? I believe we generally want accountability, but somehow we don't feel comfortable with the hard conversations that sometimes we need to have true accountability. And this can lead us to inconsistent results at best and can make it harder for us to flourish and thrive. Before I invite Georgia to introduce our guest, Marla Dukharan, I invite you to bring your awareness now to your own thoughts about accountability. For example, do you think accountability is the same as effort, meaning effort should be rewarded whether you get to the desired results or not? How do you feel when you have to give feedback, especially negative feedback about results? And how do you feel when you receive this feedback, especially when some improvement is needed? Do you feel like you are open and receptive in those circumstances or more closed and defensive? Now that we have you thinking a little bit, I'll turn you over to Georgia to introduce Marla so we can kick off this conversation with her.
Thank you so much, Emily. Good morning. Good morning, Marla. This is Monday morning at 7, and we're talking about accountability. That's
Hi.
punishment, isn't it? That seems
Indeed.
like punishment. But let me tell you something. Throughout the Caribbean region, and I'm thinking that leaders will be listening to this, and in the Caribbean, accountability is not something we talk about very often. In the Caribbean, companies, yes, we do. But throughout government, I'm not so sure that we talk about that. And so I'd like to introduce Marla, who has been campaigning and has been resolute in talking about accountability throughout about 25 Caribbean countries. So Marla is an economist and she's an advisor to Caribbean governments. Marla gives data driven insights and strategic recommendations. And Marla, one of the things I like about you and what I've seen so far is that you influence public policy. But you not only influence public policy, you also help private sectors with their decision making. And you also are building a coalition. Injustice is something that you don't like. So you talk about injustice and especially the discriminatory practices that the European Union has, especially with their blacklist. So accountability seems like your first name, your second name, and your last name. So Marla, I'd love for you to start the conversation and tell us leadership equals accountability. Why is that so important to you?
Well, first of all, good morning, ladies, and thank you for having me. The thing about accountability is that I kind of stumbled on that idea and that factor as being what I think has become the most important thing that drives outcomes, that drives results. So it's not that accountability in and of itself it's important. It's what I think it does. And I remember over many years, not just working with various governments, but observing what governments, we know this, right? They say they will do certain things, and then it doesn't get done. But then there's nobody really. I mean, we have the role of the opposition, for example, that's supposed to do this. But even as private citizens, we don't necessarily do a good job of asking hard questions and demanding answers about when things have not gone the way they were supposed to go. And then about maybe 12 years ago, when Jamaica basically hit rock bottom, when they had however many failed IMF programs and they were in a balance of payments crisis, meaning they ran out of money to pay their for their imports and their debt servicing. And they kept going to the banks to ask for help, and the banks would extend the assistance financially for them, for the government of Jamaica at the time to pay salaries. And it got to a point where the private sector, the banks in particular, said no more. And they told the government of Jamaica that, we're only going to support you if you agree to a certain reform agenda that makes sure that you don't end up in this problem again in 2 weeks. And out of there came, the IMF program, and this committee was constituted called the EPOC, the Economic Program Oversight Committee. And what this committee does is basically just hold the government to account for achieving what it says it will. And there is nowhere else in the Caribbean where I mean, just think about Jamaica, where Jamaica was a decade ago and where Jamaica is today. There is no country in the Caribbean that has made such a remarkable turnaround, that has made such remarkable progress. I mean, Jamaica has a problem right now where there is basically insufficient labor. They have their lowest unemployment ever, their lowest poverty rate ever. They're one of only two countries that's regularly measuring poverty in the Caribbean in the first place. And so when you think about that, the extent of that transformation, and you kind of peel back the layers to look at what really got them there. Yes, it was a huge reform agenda. Yes, they are still undergoing reforms. Yes, they did a lot to change the socioeconomic landscape and the way the economy is managed in Jamaica. But what really drove the results of those things that I just outlined is you had this committee holding the government to account every quarter. And so the president or the chairman of the committee, Keith Duncan, he literally, if you go on the EPOC's website, you will see every quarter they produce a report that basically outlines how the economy did relative to what the expectations were. And he literally goes live on as either live TV or YouTube. I think it's YouTube, on the corner by the rum shop, explaining to the people,
Yes.
this is what has happened over the last quarter. This is what we expected. This is how the government has performed. And that in itself has driven the results, because unless you have somebody and there's somebody holding you, just like when we were in primary school and we know that you have end of term exam and that report is going to go home to your parents and your
Yes.
grandparents, unless it's just human nature. It's not that we in the Caribbean are special or wayward. It's just human nature. We love to hold others to account, and we love when others are held to account, but we don't necessarily want to hold ourselves to account.
Certainly not.
And
That's
no,
human. I think that's human nature, though. I
it
mean,
Yes.
is.
in
Yes. Yes.
it's not as it requires a certain level of maturity to own up to, I did not get the result that I intended to. Sometimes it's because I might be slacking off. Sometimes it's because I did all my best efforts, but I still didn't get there. But I think it's the maturity to allow for that. And sometimes I suppose, under very tough circumstances, like what you would have explained that occurred in Jamaica, is why it occurred. Sometimes, when things are too easy, we tend
Yeah.
to let things slide, right? Because it's not so bad. You're like the what is it, the toad in the water that gets boiled.
The
Like if you
boiling
say
frog.
boiling, yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like that. If we, because it's not so bad, it's not so bad. Eventually, it's terrible, right?
Right. That is true.
Detrimental, it's fatal. But there's so many nuggets you're sharing there. Of course, the first thing is that results must be measured, right, and be looked at objectively. That we should be open to allow for that to occur, and not and be willing to do what it takes to make the change if the result doesn't pan out. Because I'm pretty sure that when it started, the results weren't there. I'm also pretty sure that when it started, it probably was not an easy process, Marla. I mean, do you recall, or can talk to that at all? I mean, that's a amazing kind of thing for the government to have subjected itself to, in a way.
Yeah, it was. I think if you, okay, so I did an interview I waited years and years and years to interview Keith Duncan. And finally, I think,
Okay.
was it last year? Might have been last year or 2022 that I interviewed him. So it's on my YouTube channel where he talked about how it came about and the kind of teething problems they had, and you know, the fact that they saw this as a mechanism to effect the change that you know, basically Jamaica had been trying to achieve since its independence and had failed. Many of us have as well. It's just that Jamaica was an extreme case. And so, yes, I mean, for example, you know, people in the public sector don't, they're saying, you know, you naming and shaming me publicly, and I don't like that. And there was a lot of tension and pushback. But at the end of the day, if you need help from me, meaning the private sector, meaning the bank specifically at that point, and you are doing all the wrong things, then I'm just not going to help you. So you're going to have to do this. So you're right, Emily. It comes from hitting rock bottom and not
Mm-hmm.
having a choice is how they ended up there. But at the end of the day, I think it was a blessing, and they're no longer in that kind of situation at all. I mean, Jamaica is right now, to me, the country that is in the English speaking Caribbean that I'm the most optimistic about. People talk about Guyana. I mean, yes, Guyana is growing at 30, 40% every year, but still I'm more optimistic about Jamaica simply because this new institution basically that was created in the epoch and this level of accountability that Jamaicans have now gotten used to. It's now part of their culture. It's a cultural thing now to
Yeah.
hold their government to account and to see the results that come from that. It's part of their identity now. And it has worked so well. I feel like every country needs an epoch.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. Marla, I'm glad you mentioned the word culture because we are now seeing the benefits of having that culture of accountability.
Hmm.
And like, in organizations, private organizations, where they have that structure and they have built that culture of accountability, we have not been seeing that in governments over the years. And that point is very important that you start to build that culture. What would you recommend to other countries to do?
Well, first of all, I think that culturally, again, we are not good with having difficult conversations on an individual level as well as on a national level. I think we need to be deliberate and conscious about changing that. I think also there are mechanisms for accountability, like the opposition in any country. But we have not necessarily, like in Barbados, there is no opposition basically. And in Trinidad and Tobago, our opposition is, as far as I'm concerned, they're ineffective at best. So we need to, those institutions or those organizations or entities that are designed to hold to account, we need to empower them and we need to make sure that they do their job. We need to hold them to account for, you know, the accountability that they need to drive.
Yes,
But yeah, I think it all starts with us as individuals.
that is
So
so true.
asking the questions, paying attention. I think sometimes we are starved to have issues be discussed fully across the board. You know, we fall back on these kind of mobile talk instead of having issues discussed at those levels, which
A
is really
constructive. Hmm.
unfortunate and not constructive and not supportive of us, the country as a whole, you know.
Yes,
Indeed.
So yes, I think maybe us as a population asking for more of those kinds of conversation and less of the other type um,
yeah.
would support would probably instigate them to act differently
Hmm.
too, since you know. But it's really a work in progress. I mean, I like how you said that in Jamaica with the epoch, it changed their culture somewhat, and accountability now is no longer a bad word over there as much as maybe in other places, or it's seen as progress. I suppose that's something that if we had to think of a takeaway or what we want people to think about or take away from this, how would you put it, Marla? Like what would you call different, and it could be different people, whether you're in a company, whether you're an individual in a country,
Yes.
um, even an individual within a company, within a team, not seeing things going the way, not wanting to ask the questions. I'm curious, what would you say to persons out there listening to this accountability conversation? That
Yes.
might be an
I'm so
interesting
glad you
call.
asked. I'm so glad you asked that, Emily. I just wanted to jump in. People listening, watching. I'm an individual. What can I do? I mean, I'm not an opposition. I'm not in big office. What can I do as a small person?
That's such a powerful question because I think that we need to recognize that based on the fact that we have social media and there's this democratization of information and access, that we can each individually hold to account whoever we feel is it's necessary to do so. So, for example, let's say your kids are in a school and the government has promised to fix the bathrooms, and you had 5 bathrooms working last year, you now have 2, and nothing was done. Use your voice, find your voice, and come out on social media and talk about it and agitate for the things that are where, the authorities, whether in a private firm or whether it's government related, agitate for the results that were promised and were not delivered. A simple example, I have an uncle who every day he writes down whether they got water or not, and he's got years of records. 10 years ago, they used to get water twice a month, so 24 times a year. Now they get water maybe 12 or 15 times a year. You have your data, come out on social media and talk about it and say, this is a country in decline if I can only get water 12 times a year as opposed to twice as much. So my point is each of us has the power to do that, come out on social media and make noise about the things that are not where they should be and where the accountability is lacking.
Yeah.
Marla, I think we need to bring your uncle on as our next guest.
For sure.
He has the
I
data.
can arrange it.
Yes.
But I think to Mala's point, it's having that data and being aware yourself about what is promised. I think, Marla, when we had the first conversation, you were saying that, like when we have the budget debates, we don't even check back enough to see what
The
actually
cut
happened
and
last year. What
paste.
did we say? What did we say
The
last year? And what did we actually achieve?
Yes.
and
So,
the fact that it was a cut and paste from last year into this year and into next
Yes.
year, that
Yes.
yeah,
so many
Yes.
times the same thing is repeated over and over, and there's nobody. We had one finance minister, Larry Hawaii, who came out and said, well, this is what we said we would do last year, this is what we achieved, and that was it. He was the first and the last.
it didn't happen again. So, I mean, there's so much room because I think, in private sector, a lot sometimes, I mean, more often than not, I think we see accountability happening at different levels. And I think, the core really, yes, speak out, use your voice, but also be responsible, like take in, recognize the I guess the role that you have in different at whichever level it is,
Yes.
and be open to having questions, because we also have leaders who just feel like nobody should question me because and that does not create the culture that we want to see.
Yes.
So start from the top. Also think about what is the culture we want for our organization, our country, our school, our family. And even at the family level, you could do it, right?
Yes.
So the
That's true.
parents are saying one thing and doing something else. Well, what's the example? So
Yes.
we can lead at any level, basically. We can lead at
Any
any
level.
level. And, really want to remind people today, accountability equals leadership. Think about that this week. Think about if you are being accountable. Think about how you feel when you are held to account. And it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing,
Yes.
to be held to account and to do what we say we will do.
Yes. Ladies, I want to acknowledge one comment. So we have one LinkedIn user who has made a
Yes.
comment. And that person is saying that conversations have become difficult in our country because there's a tendency to spin issues rather than address the raw facts. And Marla, that person has commended you for being an excellent advocate. Yes.
Thank
Good.
That's a
you.
great way to
But
end.
no, It's
Go
not
ahead.
easy to speak out, sorry, because yes, there you get all kinds of attacks, but you know what? Unless you continue persevering and holding leadership to account at any level, then they've won by not holding themselves to account and by silencing you, and we just shouldn't allow ourselves to be silenced.
Absolutely.
Oh, Marla, this is Marla on a Monday morning. Enough food for
Yeah,
thought,
now
man.
you've lit me on fire.
Yes, thank you so much. Emily, over to you to wrap.
I think Marla lit all of us on fire this morning. So thank you, Marla. Thank you for taking the time at
Thank
7
you.
a.m. on a Monday morning to be with us live. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your thoughts and your comments. For those of us who weren't as familiar with the EPOC program and what it did for Jamaica, I think it's such a wonderful story and example of what we can all do. And as I said, we can do it at every level. So, so just leaving it there. Thanks again. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and take care.
Take care. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Bye bye.